What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. I'm not looking particularly fierce right now because I am actually at the end of my day. I just got home from work. I had this brilliant idea and I put it on my community tab on my YouTube here. I asked, hey, would you guys be into a storytime video about my workplace struggles for International Women's Day? And 9 of you said, yeah, sounds awesome and weird, and then one person said, nah, we good. So, I'm just gonna go with 90% on this one, and I just thought that I would share this story. It is a story that I have not been able to share in the past because of company ties, and they're just sensitive information, but I'm not going to share where I was working at the time or anything like that. So I want to tell this story because, not just because I think that it's like tea on my old company, but because I need to get it out, you know what I mean? Sometimes these things happen and you feel like you can't talk about it. The statute of limitations on workplace sexual harassment is 180 days, and so it's like if you don't lawyer up within 6 months, like you're screwed. So this is all completely past its statute of limitations, and it's all, you know, basically legal bygones, and so I'm not going to name any names, so there's not really any defamation here. I just want to share this story because it's a really sad story that has kind of a happy ending, and so I'm hoping that it's kind of inspirational for International Women's Day, so let's hop in. So I used to work at a company that had clients, so, you know, an agency. Agencies typically have clients, and so we would always have this thing annually where we would invite all the clients to come to town and we would do a summit for them where we would just kind of walk them through all our strategies, make them feel loved, etc. It was just sort of like a team building and whatever. And so I had a client who was actually my client, and I had one other person on my team who kind of managed the relationship with them. And so it was my job to kind of shepherd them through this whole week of different seminars and speeches and panels and things like that. And so this guy came to town, and we had to go to dinner kind of as a group, and then we had to go to kind of all of our like little meals and meet and greets and stuff together. And I had talked to him on the phone at length. I'd emailed back and forth with him at length. I'd never met him in person, and I just started to get a vibe off of him, just kind of a weird vibe, and it had a lot to do with like him drinking, because it's like that's not something that happens in the workplace, and so it wasn't like I'd ever been on the phone talking to this guy while he was under the influence of alcohol, at least not to my knowledge. And so I think that things kind of started to shift, as they usually do in those kinds of situations. So a lot of times in, you know, conference situations for business, people do like to kind of introduce alcohol to the situation because it really greases the wheels of us all feeling like human beings at the end of the day, because so much of the time the client versus business relationship can be really tense, and sometimes if you just kind of lubricate that with a little bit like a responsible amount of alcohol, everybody kind of finds a little more common ground, right? And that's a very innocent sort of like grown-up way of us all getting over all of our weird social anxieties together as a collective. So that in itself is not wrong. But the way that this guy was kind of starting to behave was a little weird, and he was kind of like touching girls with, you know, like a lot of opportunity. Like he was just kind of like taking every opportunity to like, oh, if something was funny, he'd touch your leg or something like that, and you kind of started to get this weird vibe off of him. And that night, I just kind of realized that I felt weird if I went to the bathroom at the restaurant we were at, if he was going to the bathroom at the same time, because if I caught him someplace where we weren't supervised, I realized I felt threatened, and I was like, huh, why do I feel that way? You know what I mean? Like, what a funny kind of like mix of emotions that's making me feel like I need to protect myself as a woman. And so the next night was our like big finale, right? And so we had to go and really engage with all the clients, and there was a lot of like open bar alcohol flowing and a lot of kind of different things to get us all talking to each other, a lot of different like, you know, stations and booths and stuff like that. And it was like we rented out this big space downtown and everybody was eating and drinking and blah, blah, blah. And so this guy really got sloshed. And I remember going into that night thinking, I'm going to stay 100% sober tonight so that I can leave whenever I need to. Like, I need to be able to drive myself home if I start to feel weirded out. Plus, if something were to happen, I want to be held at the highest level of credibility of not being compromised by drinking in that moment. And so already we're introducing this like weird privilege that men have, right? Where it's like I have to be at my 110% best behavior in order to be taken seriously in any situation, from the standpoint that I had to plan ahead in order to have like a contingency in case this guy did something sketchy. So I stayed pretty much as long as I needed to for it to feel like a professional appearance. You know what I mean? I was like, okay, I'm gonna go make all of my touch points, all of my appearances, all of my contacts and whatever, and then I'm gonna go the hell home because I just felt weird. But when I went home, because he had been kind of odd, he'd been talking to me about like, where's your boyfriend, you know, like, he's not here, does that mean, you're like not off limits and blah, 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 and I was like, ooh, okay, like, I'm gonna go. And so then I got home and I emailed my like leadership person. So not my boss, but like my boss's boss. I emailed him and I'm like, hey, just throwing this out there. I got a weird vibe off of my client. Like, I just want to throw it out there. I just want to make sure that this is all on the record just in case something happens. And he's like, okay, I appreciate you coming to me. I'll take care of it. No problem. I'll look into this immediately. And I felt pretty good, you know? And then maybe 30 seconds later, I got another email from him that said, by the way, did you tell him no? And I realized I was on my own. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I just caused friction and a misogynist is now in control of my future. And wow, I'm really not excited about this. And I actually emailed him back and I said, you need to be careful. You're towing the line right now of victim blaming, and that immediately set him off. And I was just like, because I was just trying to kind of advise him in the situation. I was like, nothing's really happened yet to my knowledge, but you might want to express a little bit more sensitivity in this situation and future situations of this nature, because your reaction, it's not very contemporary if you're working with a bunch of millennial females. You know what I mean? It was just kind of like, he needed to be enlightened a little bit. So, come to find out the next day, things had gotten way sketchier after I left. Like, I left probably like 8:30. Like, he had propositioned a married lesbian. He had all out said that one girl and her fiance like weren't really, they didn't count, and like he'd like cornered her, and like it was awful. All of these women had been victimized by this guy. And guess what? The dudes in leadership of this company didn't want to acknowledge it. We all felt threatened, but as soon as we all got into like a boardroom situation where it was just all the girls that had felt threatened and the men in charge of the company, suddenly they wanted to talk about facts. They wanted to talk about things that could be corroborated. They didn't want to talk about how we felt. They kept saying, you know what? We just need to separate emotions from this situation because we just need to talk about facts. As soon as we get into emotions, things just get so muddy and it's just a dangerous territory, and so we just really need to talk about facts. And they also had one woman who was like our accountant at the time, who was definitely older and not very enlightened and definitely not kind of part of our zeitgeist. And they were like, well, she's going to be our present female to make sure that, everything is hunky-dory and like kosher, as, it's us men talking to you women. Like, we want to make sure we have kind of a liaison. At one point in this conversation, in many of these meetings that we had about this situation, where I kept trying to push it forward and just kept getting sidelined, and every time we would actually get in these meetings, everything was already really tense. At one point, this woman said something like, well, guys, but isn't that the behavior we've all come to expect from men by now? And I was just like, where am I? This is like the Twilight Zone. I've never seen anything like this. And at the time, we didn't have an HR department. It was very much like a startup environment. It was just a lot of, kind of anything goes. And so, like, there was just no one to go to. And I remember all of the girls who originally had said something, they had all come forward and said, yes, this happened to me. I mean, very serious things. They all started to say, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was kind of funny, like, he was just drunk and it was whatever, like, it's not a big deal. Like, I didn't feel threatened. It was just kind of one night of my life, he's kind of a goon, like, whatever. And it was like me and one other girl, and we were just like standing our ground. And so then she asks me one day, she says, hey, I've got a meeting with one of these guys in leadership, kind of one of the two terrible dudes who were handling this whole situation. One that I emailed and one was the other guy, this guy. So we get into his office, and she had basically asked for like 15 minutes of his time or whatever. And he was like eating lunch, and he was like, yeah, sure. And so she's like, will you come in there with me just so that I kind of have like a witness to the conversation that we're about to have? And I was like, sure. Because what had happened was that the leadership team that kind of oversaw my clients had decided, we're not going to force him off. We're going to make him stay as your client contact, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And so she had heard that, and she was pretty incensed about it, and she really wanted some detail on it. And so I went in there with her, and as she started to introduce this issue to him in a closed-door meeting, he started going typical manipulator. He was going, how dare you come to me and tell me that I'm not doing enough on your schedule when it was my kid's birthday on Friday and I've just been so busy. And how dare you come to me during my lunch break and just fling this on me? And how dare you call me insensitive? I have a daughter like this. And of course, I'm buying none of it. I mean, it is just so textbook to me. My dad's a manipulator like that. I've been around men like that my entire life. And I am just staring him in the face. Like when he says, it was my kid's birthday, I just look at him. He's like, what's that look for? And I was like, I'm not buying any of this. And then I look over to my friend, who is the person who called the meeting, and she's just sobbing. And I was like, oh, poor thing, like she is really taking all this to heart. And so after we get out of this meeting where he just tried to beat us black and blue, I just had to sit down with her and say, you know what? All of that was typical master manipulation. That's what that was. That was him being a narcissist and all of the defense mechanisms that he's built over the course of his life in order to make himself not be vulnerable to the judgment of others, because he knows deep down that if he has to examine that part of himself, he's not going to like what he sees. And she's like, I feel like I just got scolded by the principal. I feel like I'm just in trouble, and blah, blah. And I was like, you're not. You, honestly, all it is that you allowed yourself to be vulnerable. You trusted him. You shouldn't blame yourself for trusting somebody. It was he who preyed upon that trust, and he who betrayed that kind of unspoken agreement, and it's not your fault. And so, I mean, after that, she just was like, not long at the company. I mean, she found a really great position, went to it, good on her. She's happy now as far as I know, but I mean, essentially she, felt like she couldn't work at the company anymore. The future of my job was far more complicated. So then I get on a phone call with one of the female directors that they have basically cornered into having this discussion with me, and they tell me that they're going to put me on a new account, and it is going to be the account they just took away from my fiance. So I know, after 2 years of watching his life be a living hell, that it is the worst, most unreasonable client at the entire company. I know it. Mike never complains. This guy wrote the most abusive emails. No one would ever question him, and they're like, we just really think that you're the kind of person that we need on this account. You're the kind of person that's really just got the potential to really handle this. And I'm like, look, if Mike can't do it, I don't know that, why are you doing this? And it occurred to me, I'm being retaliated against. And I remember saying, if you're gonna do this, I need a raise. And I remember her being like, well, I can't approve that. And I was like, then you need to talk to your supervisor. I need a raise. I need a number. This is unreasonable. Are you promoting me? Are you demoting me? Are you punishing me for this situation because I made waves about a client that was acting completely inappropriately? And so she starts crying. Fine. But she starts crying because they've put her in a corner. I felt really bad for her. They were just kind of like, hey, handle this. You're a woman, she'll understand. And of course, I was not seeing that at all. I was seeing straight through the situation. And so she just completely panicked and just starts sobbing. And she's just like, I just feel like you have so much potential. And I was just like, I just feel like this is a giant circus. Why am I here? And at the time, I knew that there was a position open kind of adjacent in a pathway that I had kind of already been on at the company in what's called architecture, so it doesn't actually engage with the client, but it's not taken as seriously at the company because you're not directly at the bottom line of making money for the company. And so I knew that it was going to kind of place me out of promotion territory you know what I mean, into like a leadership role or something like that. Like I was gonna be taken out of the track that I was in, that I had kind of worked so hard to get into. I already had 2 clients, you know? I said, okay, I already know the manager. She's already been my manager for the architecture role. I want to go to the architecture role because I was the only person who would have applied for it because I was the most qualified person for it. I already knew how to write XML. I already knew all the qualifications. I could just really fold into that. But I knew that they weren't going to take me as seriously because I wasn't directly communicating with the clients. And so I just kind of took the hit. And the woman who had originally, you know, kind of been tasked with bringing this news to me, she said, well, you know, I think you're just doing this to avoid being transferred to this account, the crappy one. And I mean, that was absolutely true. But at the same time, I was being retaliated against for making waves about a client acting inappropriately. I was being punished. And so they didn't immediately take that contact off of the account. I believe that the other company, the actual client company, ended up taking him off of the account just because it was easier so that there weren't as many conflicts around it, but our company did not take really decisive action about it. And so I went into this architecture role and I stayed there for a while. And I mean, I stayed there until I actually ended up leaving the company. And it did, while I do really appreciate that role and I appreciate my manager and I appreciate everything that I learned, it did stunt my career growth because I wasn't kind of growing on the track that I had put so much time into. That said, I was in line for a raise. I was in line for a raise like 3 months after that, and I had been promised this raise. I was on a track for it, and when I went in for the review, they said, you switched tracks. You don't get the raise anymore. You know, you're basically like, you were here, and then you went to that other role, and it's like here. And so, you know, we just really can't justify paying you that. And so I was super freaking heartbroken and pissed, and I asked them to at least draw me kind of a new track where it was like I knew where I was going to go soon, like when I was going to get to that pay level. And an agency, if you have ever worked in an agency or if you ever want to work in an agency, their pay structure is just so tight. They write really, really tight contracts. Has everything to do with how much your clients bring into the company per full-time hour that you're getting paid. And so they literally can't afford to pay you more sometimes. Like there's just really, really insanely tight margins in an agency. And so my salary was already pretty low and I just didn't feel like it was that unreasonable what I was hoping to get paid, and I was definitely just being punished. It was just like this long-term punishment because they wanted me out of their hair. I'm not really sure how long it was before they changed our HR director. We had one guy who was there for a while and then he left. And it was in that gap that he was gone, I believe. And so there was no HR department at all at the time. And then they hired this amazing woman. I could get emotional. I love her so much. She still emails me just to see how I'm doing, checks in on me all the time. She's like a second mom. She's just the sweetest person in the world. And she came in there and she reviewed everybody's pay. And she brought me into a room and she was like, hey, your situation seems really complicated. Like, what's going on? You know, she was new at the company. She was trying to get the lay of the land because I think the effect that she got was that like the last HR director left because it was just such an unholy mess. And so I told her the whole story. And she went into a meeting with the man who had originally denied me my raise. She looked him in the eye, told him it was a gross injustice. Not only did she force him to give me the raise, but she forced him to back pay me as if I had had it the whole time. And so I got a giant lump sum. It was incredible. And I can't believe what a difference it makes when someone can come in and use their power to advocate for someone who's powerless. There's just no limit to the metaphor, to the application of that. And yes, in this sense, it happened to be a woman helping out another woman. And it doesn't always have to be that way, but the basis of this situation hinged so much on the fact that I was female and the perpetrator was male, and the men who were in control of the fate of my career in light of the situation were male and were not taking me or any of my counterparts seriously. And the fact that she could come in with her authority and her information and come in just guns blazing in a very professional manner, guns blazing in a very professional manner, come in and exact justice on my behalf was just the greatest gift I could have received. Also, the manager that, I should mention her too, who enveloped me into the architecture role. I don't want to mention names because I don't want, that's somebody else's business, you know what I mean? I'm like getting red. I can't thank her enough. She absolutely saw my situation for what it was. She was my biggest advocate. She trained me from the moment that I started at the company, and when they did a bunch of layoffs in the very beginning when I got hired, she went in and defended me so that I didn't get laid off, because I was so new. It would have been easy. And she was like, no, she's the best, build out person, best architecture person that we have. You just need to see her potential and blah, blah. She has advocated for me forever. And so I really have not just these really amazing women, but also I've got some really great feminist men who have made all of the difference in the world for my career, that have really made decisions that were make or break for the sustenance and the progress of my career. Just the kinds of people who can see past their surroundings, see past essentially see a lot of leadership and a lot of kind of older male mentality for what it is, and actively work against it, actively work to advocate for people who are powerless. And I only hope that in the future of my career, as I sort of move up the tiers, that I can advocate for myself and continue to advocate for people who I'm bringing up. I want to be that person who, granted, I'd rather not see the injustices at all, but I want to advocate for the powerless in the career that I'm in at any given time. I just want to, whenever I can, be that person who is kind of a hand up for someone else, because I really have just a handful of incredible people to thank for saving me from really crappy and unfair situations. So I wanted to share this story with you guys. It's been living in my gut a really long time. The company, like I said, it's under great leadership now as far as HR is concerned, so I really feel like things are a lot more on the up and up, I guess, but the leadership there, I would drag them by name. Absolutely. Given the opportunity, given the right platform, if I knew it would actually make a difference and not just be really satisfying for me, because that's not really enough, then I would definitely drag them, but I'm not going to. I'm going to try and remain mature here, even though I'm so red. But yeah, have you guys ever had these kinds of issues? I'm sure that you have. This is not uncommon, unfortunately, and so, with kind of the Me Too movement and everything like that, I was just me too, man, unfortunately, me too, everybody too. So, guys, if you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up. There's probably not a lot more videos like this coming from me because I hopefully won't have any more situations like this in my life. I mean, there are always microaggressions, but I try not to get hung up on that kind of stuff. This was an enormous punctuation in my life when it was happening, and it is the reason I ultimately ended up leaving the company. And so it's a story that's worth telling. So guys, if you want to keep hanging out with me on this channel, hit the button down below and subscribe. I would love it if you did. And thank you so much for watching. Happy International Women's Day. Tell the women in your life that you love and appreciate them today, and I love and appreciate all of you. I love and appreciate you, even if you're a man who loves and appreciates women. You know what I mean? International Women's Day doesn't just have to be about women. It can be about feminist men too. So, guys, thank you so much for watching. I love you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!